So maybe we're a slightly different case to the refuse vehicles. We know that in heavy duty trucking, end users are operating on incredibly fine margins, and so there really isn't a willingness to pay more. If they have an option to choose a cheaper vehicle, they will do so. And so when we think about demand creation at the 10,000 vehicle scale, which is really what we're going to need in order to meet the heavy duty CO2 targets for 45% emissions reduction by 2030, um, we're going to need to see more demand creation because at the moment, maybe fleet operators are willing to trial one or two vehicles in their fleets, but it is more expensive. That shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. We're trying to compete with a technology that has been in commercialization for 100 years. So we don't have time to wait for this to get to the rock bottom costs. We're going to have to scale up while we bring costs down. So in terms of creating the demand, I see there's basically two options. One is that you can create a business case for people to purchase these vehicles, or two is that you can mandate them to purchase the vehicles. In Europe, the OEMs are currently the only people who are mandated under the heavy duty CO2 standards, and the only other mandates for procurement exist within public fleets, which doesn't really cover the heavy duty sector where hydrogen is going to be most needed. Um, so if we were to look at the business case option, I think really a case of having a strong support system for hydrogen is going to be really important. Obviously, we want to get towards green hydrogen in the long term, and I think the implementation of a strong red credit system would be massively beneficial. I think the UK is actually leading on this with the hydrogen allocation round contract for difference, which massively supports being able to provide hydrogen to the market at an acceptable cost for end users. But we're also seeing efforts to do this through things like the European Hydrogen Bank, and then the implementation of red credits. And we're really looking forward to seeing the implementation of RED 3 next year by member states. And then, in addition to supporting the operational cost via the cost of hydrogen, I think during this scale up, a coherent approach to funding at least the AFIR network would be massively beneficial. So, funding together for vehicles and stations. I think funding stations alone is not sufficient because you can fund me 100% of the capital cost. If there's no demand for the fuel, then no one's going to build that station. So a flexible approach to making sure you have high utilization of those stations, funding for the vehicles. We think for a 1 ton station, about 20 trucks would be a good number, and funding us together to build out the AFIR network. And that's really going to provide a minimum basis to allow those trucks to be sold, obviously subject to acceptable operational costs, and member states have infinite options for how they achieve that. There's road tolls and taxes, there's Euro vignettes, there are non-financial incentives, but obviously, as I've said, for freight operators, that's got a limited impact. So anything you can do to create that operational cost parity is going to be the thing that drives demand. Or your other option is to mandate the purchase of zero emission vehicles.